All right, we begin with breaking news out of Turkey for you. Local officials are investigating a shooting near the Israeli consulate in Istanbul. This information just coming into our newsroom. In a statement to CNN Turk, the city's governor says one attacker has been killed and two more were, in their words, neutralized. Two police officers were also injured in this incident. We are also following President Trump's deadline for Iran. He says Tehran must reach a deal by 8 p.m. tonight, or the U.S. will attack the country's power plants and bridges. Alicia Zhang asked the president about that yesterday.
Just to clarify, in order for Iran to successfully meet your deadline tomorrow, do they have to make a deal, open the strait, or both?
We have to have a deal that's acceptable to me. And part of that deal is going to be we want free traffic of oil and everything else.
We also have this video released by Iranian police, allegedly showing Iranian forces shooting at a U.S. aircraft while the U.S. searched for the stranded American airmen. The recovery operation lasted about 8 hours, with one U.S. official saying, quote, every single minute was excruciating, end quote. Also, the Israeli military is warning Iranians to avoid taking trains until tonight. In a social media post originally written in Farsi, the IDF said, quote, your presence on trains and near railway lines endangers your life. So a lot happening this morning, and we have team coverage for you across all of it. Elizabeth Palmer is in Tel Aviv with the latest on the fighting. Bradley Blackburn is here in studio to break down how the war is impacting what you're paying at home. But let's begin with CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi in our D.C. bureau. Good morning, Olivia. How did President Trump explain this 8 p.m. deadline tonight during the briefing, and is there any hint that it's working?
Yeah, good morning to you, Errol. The president said this is the critical period where the Iranians need to get to the table and make a deal. But I do want to note that this extension that the president has given on this deadline has happened 3 times now. He originally said the deadline was April 1st, then April 6th, and now it is tonight, 8 p.m. on April 7th. So we have about roughly 13 hours to go before some type of deal is made. And you heard what the president said to Alicia Zhang yesterday, which is that the Strait of Hormuz needs to be open. But, Errol, we have seen no indication that there has been any movement towards that right now. The president is also threatening that if there is no deal, he said Iran is going to have no bridges and no power plants. And the president said also at one point that one of the hardest parts of the negotiations with Iran are the fact that there are no communications. He was saying that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, is having trouble communicating with the Iranians because of the military attacks that the U.S. has conducted inside of the country. I found that quite notable. The president said that they're passing notes back and forth to each other, something that he called communication like 2,000 years ago. So quite notable there. And as far as potential deals that could be made, if there's any indication as to who's doing the negotiation, we know that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff was in Washington yesterday, but Vice President Vance, who was suspected to be leading some of the negotiations with the Iranians, is actually in Hungary today with their Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So notable there, given the fact that we were expecting the Vice President, Secretary Rubio, and Special Envoy Witkoff and the president's son-in-law to be part of these Iranian negotiations.
Now, Iran claims that Trump's threat against civilian infrastructure are a war crime. There are some legal experts that agree with that. How is the president responding?
Well, by our understanding, it is a war crime to attack civilian infrastructure that doesn't have an immediate military nexus or military target. So targeting bridges that are used by civilians or desalination plants or even power plants can be seen as potentially a war crime if they're not able to prove that this was part of the Iranian military war effort. The president yesterday says that doesn't seem to be a consideration for him. He told reporters that very little is off limits when thinking about what to strike specifically inside of Iran. He also suggested at one point that the Iranian people would be willing to suffer to get rid of the current regime in place and to have the U.S. continue to perpetuate this war. This was in response to a question where the president was asked, given the fact that he had threatened the regime earlier in January because of the way they were killing protesters inside the country, why then would he attack the civilian infrastructure that would potentially harm the Iranian people. Take a listen to what he said here.
They would be willing to suffer that in order to have freedom. The Iranians have, and we've had numerous intercepts. Please keep bombing. Bombs that are dropping near their homes. Please keep bombing.
So the president suggesting there that the U.S. has intercepted communications from people inside the country, asking the U.S. to continue bombing. I do want to note that Iran's president this morning in a post on X said that over 14 million people, proud Iranians, have signed up in this moment, declared their readiness to sacrifice their lives in defense of Iran. So if that gives any indication of how Iranian people are feeling inside of the country, Errol, it's certainly very interesting and contradictory to what the president said.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi, thank you very much. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer joins us now live from Tel Aviv with more. Good morning, Liz. You know, Iran has done many things. Its embassies reposting these Lego AI trolling videos of the administration. But what is the official response from the country? And is the president right? Is the population saying, please keep bombing?
Well, 14 million people sounds like a lot, but actually it's less than 20% of the population. So we know that at least half Iranians before the war began really wanted to get rid of their government. Certainly President Trump's threat to obliterate the power stations and bridges has badly frightened people, as you might be able to imagine. Pro-regime media were broadcasting appeals for so-called patriots to form human shields around the power stations, and it's likely that some of the regime supporters will do that later on today. But most people, millions and millions of whom can't stand their government, are just trying to survive. I asked one of my contacts in Iran what it's like in the neighborhood, and he said people are stressed, as you can imagine. Some are panicking. They don't have internet that connects to the wider world, so they're obsessively on their phones calling one another to find out what's being hit in the neighborhood or in other cities. Today they're also rushing to the grocery stores, he said, to buy whatever they can, to hoard in case things get really bad. And anyone who's got a country house is rushing out of the city to take refuge. There is nothing to keep them in the cities because of the schools and the universities being closed, as well as most of the offices. So the whole country is kind of holding its breath and keeping heads down.
And meanwhile, Liz, strikes, bombing, the fighting itself is ongoing. What's the latest on that front this morning?
Well, there's been heavy bombing this morning, U.S. and American airstrikes in Iran on a whole variety of targets in the capital as well. The targets range from Iranian military positions to an aeronautics center inside the capital city in quite a posh residential area, which is very frightening. You can imagine if you've got an apartment on the 20th floor and you see this enormous plume of dust right, a few blocks away. They've also been hitting infrastructure like airports where there are military installations and the petrochemical industry. Here in Israel, we've also had missiles heading this way from Iran. The air raid sirens have sounded. At least 4 missiles were targeted here. We don't really know what the formal targets were, but we've seen some damage to residential buildings and streets.
All right, Elizabeth Palmer with all the latest for us out of Tel Aviv. Thank you, Liz. Now, let's talk about your wallet. About 6 weeks ago, President Trump claimed the U.S. was making major gains in bringing prices down and increasing affordability during his State of the Union address.
Their policies created the high prices. Our policies are rapidly ending them. We are doing really well. Those prices are plummeting downward.
Well, now some of those prices are creeping back up as the war with Iran's economic impact ripples through the U.S. You're looking at CBS News' Bradley Blackburn. He's here with more on where some of the biggest price shifts are. Bradley, good morning.
Errol, good morning. Our CBS Money Watch team has been tracking some of these price shifts. And of course, one of the most visible impacts has been this number everyone sees at the pump. The average price of a gallon of gas is up more than $1 compared to just before the war and continuing to rise, according to AAA. A recent Lending Tree survey found nearly a third of Americans are spending less on other things because of higher fuel costs. Those fuel prices are also impacting air travel. Global airfare is up 24% compared to this time last year. That's according to OAG, a flight analytics platform. And some airlines like JetBlue are hiking baggage fees, and others are canceling flights, including United, Air New Zealand, and Vietnam Airlines. And now there's also the cost to mail packages. It's rising as delivery companies add fuel surcharges to cover their increased costs. The U.S. Postal Service added an 8% fuel surcharge for shipments. FedEx, Amazon, and UPS have also all introduced their own surcharges as well, Errol.
Wow. And I know that those are some of the most visible ways, but are there any less visible ways that this economic impact is trickling down to other areas?
Sure. The war is impacting something as fundamental as food prices. We looked at the FAO Food Price Index. That's a global measure of food commodities, and it rose 2.4% overall just in March. And narrowing in, nearly every major crop reported price increases on that index, too. Sugar, for example, jumped 7.2% because of expectations that countries will need to use more sugarcane to make alternative biofuels. Palm, sunflower, and soy oil all rose for similar reasons. And then there's also the impact of higher fertilizer prices and rising diesel prices, which, of course, is the main fuel that's used in farming and trucking, Errol.
Yeah, that's right. It's just in so many places. Bradley, thank you.